Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Movies Reloaded. I hope you are all doing well and hope you like the video we have for you today. Today's movie is a romance film from 2007 called Never Forever. With no more delay, let's get it. The movie begins with a funeral where Sophie comforts the widow and her mother-in-law when she breaks down into tears. As they return home, we see that Sophie is married to a Korean-American man named Andrew, and the two of them love and care for each other very much, but the inability to conceive and have a child has taken its toll on them. Andrew is very distraught about losing his father, and after having sex with Sophie on the dining table, he begins to cry in her arms. The next day, we see Sophie visiting her doctor, who tells her that the sperm given by Andrew was not healthy enough to get Sophie pregnant. Sophie is upset to hear this news, and in her desperation, asks the doctor if they can use healthy sperm given by a donor without telling Andrew, as she believes that he needs to have a child that he believes is his and hers. But naturally, the doctor tells her that they cannot do this without Andrew being present. In the next scene, Sophie and Andrew are visiting his family, who encourage Sophie to pray so that God will bless them with a child. Andrew's mother speaks up that she prayed consecutively for 40 days before being able to conceive Andrew. That night, while Sophie and Andrew are having dinner, Sophie asks him to teach her how to pray, as no one actually taught her how to. Andrew indulges her for a bit before going back to his depressed state and telling her that God is not going to get her pregnant. After that, we see Sophie visiting the doctor's clinic again and is told to wait. As she does, a Korean man walks in order to make a donation. Sophie is immediately interested and watches as they lead the man inside to meet with the doctor. She follows and sits outside the room in order to hear more. Instead, she hears the nurse telling the doctor that the background check has revealed that the man is an illegal alien, and the doctor informs the guy that they won't be able to register him in light of this update. The man is upset and leaves. With Sophie in tow, she follows him all the way to Chinatown, where she discovers that he works at a laundromat, but cannot bring herself to talk to him. The next scene shows us Sophie and Andrew at a party thrown by one of their friends for their newborn baby. There, Sophie mingles around and also watches Andrew socialize with their friends and children, noticing how well he gets along with kids. Later, after getting home and going to sleep, Sophie suddenly wakes up with a bad feeling. She gets out of bed and walks into the bathroom to discover Andrew unconscious in a bathtub, having attempted to drown himself after taking some pills. Andrew is immediately taken to the hospital and saved, and the incident naturally leaves Sophie very desperate and anxious. Soon, she ends up at the laundromat again, and this time continues to follow Jihah Kim around as he runs his errands and later to his apartment. She sits on the stairs outside his apartment and waits for his return. Jihah, in the meanwhile, is trying to sell some watches, but when people find out that he does not have a business license, no one is interested. When Jihah finally returns home, he finds an unknown American woman at his doorstep. Sophie tells him that she has a job proposition for him as she has realized that he's in need of money. They go inside, and with some visible apprehension, Sophie tells Jihah that she had first seen him at the clinic downtown and proposes that for every time they have sex, she can pay him $300. And in case of pregnancy, she will pay him an additional $30,000. Jihah is shocked to hear this, but Sophie takes off her top to convince him, and the two of them have sex. Life goes on for Sophie as these visits to Jihah at his run-down apartment become the norm. Her husband comes home from the hospital, and she tries to care and connect with him, but he is even more distant from her than he was before. Sophie finds that she can't sleep well as Andrew stays up most nights playing the piano. One day during her visits to Jihah, Sophie falls asleep after the deed. Jihah lets her sleep a little and she freaks out, thinking that she's been asleep for a long time. He makes her some tea and assures her it was only a few minutes. He asks what her name is, and she tells him only her first name and doesn't mention her Korean husband. Some days later, while they're getting ready to go to church, Andrew asks about a jacket of his which Sophie mentions she's dropped off at the cleaners. He says they'll pick it up on their way, and they end up going to the laundromat. There, Jihah notices Andrew and sees him getting in the car with Sophie. The next time that Sophie visits, Jihah says he wants to eat first and takes her to a restaurant. He orders expensive dishes and later on confronts Sophie about her husband. They end up arguing with Jihah, noting the physical similarities between himself and her husband, and saying that he has other friends he can introduce her to, and Sophie counters that with how not even the people at the clinic would take him in. that he is only good enough for his penis, and even that is not good enough. He follows her out onto the street, where she breaks down and tells Jihah of Andrew's suicidal tendencies because he is sterile. Jihah takes Sophie to a spot in the park where he prays and teaches her how to do so too. They return to Jihah's apartment, and this time they make love to each other. Sophie returns home to find Andrew home early and covers up her absence by saying she was visiting Dr. Hansen, who has told her about some new advancements that might enable her to conceive. But Andrew does not want to try anymore, and they end up arguing. The next morning at church, Sophie faints while going in. We see Jihah buying flowers and looking at rings while out. The next time Sophie comes to visit, she tells him that she is pregnant and hands him an envelope full of cash. She says that they won't meet again, and they awkwardly part ways. As Sophie and Andrew celebrate her pregnancy, Jihah goes through receipts at the laundromat to find Sophie's address. The next day, Andrew and Sophie host a party, and Jihah shows up. Andrew sees him at the door and asks if he's there for the party, but Jihah leaves, saying he must have the wrong address. He goes around back to sneak a look at Sophie. As the group begins a prayer, Sophie can't focus and begins to fantasize about Jihah. Sometime later, Sophie can't keep away and visits Jihah at his apartment, and the two sleep together. In the next scene, we see Sophie and Andrew are visiting the sonographer, who tells them that they are going to have a boy. Sometime later, Sophie's cab is late when she attempts to go to Jihah's, so she catches the train instead. Meanwhile, Andrew arrives home early and answers the door to the delayed taxi driver. Andrew drives to Jihah's address and overhears Sophie with him from outside the door. Inside, the two lovers lie in each other's arms as Sophie shares her guilt over the affair and the pregnancy. Jihah later gives Sophie a key to his apartment. The next time Sophie is there, she notices new bedsheets and falls asleep while waiting for Jihah. He shows up and they share an intimate conversation, but the illusion of their small secret shatters when the police show up and detain Jihah for his illegal residence in the United States. Sophie watches helplessly as he is dragged away and leaves, distraught. When Sophie returns home, Andrew informs her that he knows about her affair. He asks that she abort the child so that he can forgive her and they can begin again. But she refuses, saying that the child is hers. Andrew restrains Sophie and attempts to drag her upstairs, with Sophie kicking and screaming. She begs God to let the baby live. Eventually, Andrew lets her go. Elsewhere, Jihah is told by authorities that he will be deported the next morning. While being held, he requests to make a phone call. Sophie goes to Jihah's spot in the park to pray. She then goes to Jihah's apartment, where she answers a ringing cell phone. A few years later, a visibly pregnant Sophie is seen on the beach with her son. While he plays in the water, Sophie watches and knits for the new baby. It is presumed that Sophie followed Jihah and they are now together. I hope you liked the video, so do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.